Greetings viewers, Ericthecarguy here with my 2005 Honda Element, also known as Watson. Today I'm going to be replacing the clutch hydraulics on Watson, both the clutch master and the clutch slave. I will be covering not only the basic installation, but also the adjustment of the rod on the clutch master to make sure you get that just right, also bleeding the system. A few other tips and tricks along the way, so stay tuned. Before we get too deep, let's talk a little bit about why I'm replacing these components. I'm really going after the clutch master cylinder. The clutch slave cylinder is sort of a target of opportunity. I'm replacing it. I'm going to have the hydraulic system open anyway. You can actually buy these as a package deal where you can get a clutch master and slave together. Just do them both at the same time. That way all the components that move in the system are just done. So I'm replacing the slave just because I'm replacing the master cylinder. You don't necessarily have to do it that way, but again, if you got the system open, the system's open. The reason I'm going after the master in this is because it's got about 200,000 miles on it, and every time you apply the clutch pedal, it makes a clicking noise. And that clicking noise, I'm certain, is coming from the inside of the master cylinder. There's a little push rod that goes into it, and I think it's just worn on the inside of that. When it gets cold, when you go to apply the clutch pedal, it's very slow and a little bit stiff. And part of that is the clutch design, which I'm changing on this. And it's something you could also consider. I'll link parts in the description. But for those two reasons, it's clicking and it's starting to get stiff when it's cold. Those are the only reasons I'm doing this. Another thing to look for is leaks on the master cylinder, mostly was where I see them. If you follow the clutch pedal up and you see where the master cylinder goes into the firewall, you might notice some fluid leaking out of it. If you notice fluid leaking out of the master cylinder, it's done. It needs to be replaced. So if it's leaking, or if you're just annoyed by it like I am, this is how we're going to replace it. Let's get started. I recommend starting with setting the parking brake and chocking one of the rear wheels. It may seem counterintuitive, but I am going to remove the battery. And the main reason for this is going to give me much better access to the top of the transmission and the slave cylinder and all that stuff there. Be sure you have your radio code before you disconnect your battery. So all kinds of access now. You might have seen me undoing a couple of these battery cables, which are clipped on. And the way you unclip them, normally there's a little tab here that you can depress or move. You see that little tab there? Normally you can move that little tab and pull things out, but this one didn't want to do that. But there's another tab up here that I could disconnect. And the same is true for this one. So now I've disconnected all that stuff. And you know what? Just for good measure, I'm also going to remove the battery tray. There are two fasteners here, and I believe 2 fasteners underneath, and those are all 12 millimeter. I believe you do not have to remove those fasteners underneath all the way. I think the tray slides into those. We'll find out in a minute. This piece just pops off. This guy actually had 3 fasteners on the side. So there was one here, and one here. There were 2 underneath. Only this one was the one that you can partially take out. You have to take out all of this one in the front. I'm going to start by knocking the line on the slave cylinder loose. I think this is going to need a little bit of penetrating oil. This is a 10 millimeter fitting, and I'm using a line wrench, which is much better suited for this type of work. If you round this off, your day will get worse. Somewhat typical. The entire fitting is moving in the slave cylinder, so I'm going to have to undo it first. 2 12 millimeter fasteners hold the slave cylinder to the transmission housing. Now, if you follow this line, this hard line back, you'll see that it leads to a bracket. And that bracket has a 10 millimeter fastener on it. I'm going to remove that 10 millimeter fastener so that I can move this around a little bit better. There's a soft hose line on the other side of that. Once you get that 10 millimeter out of the way, that whole bracket and everything will come loose, and you'll be able to pull this slave cylinder up to where you can get to it better. Before I got started, I put a piece of cardboard and an oil drain pan underneath to catch any fluids or anything like that that's going to come out, because it will. So if you care about your driveway floor or your garage floor, do this. With that bracket undone, you can now take this whole thing and put it up here where I can get to it. And now I can put a wrench on this bottom part and then also on this part of the nut and be able to work them both loose. And this, as I said before, is 10. I'm experiencing something that you may very well experience, and that is that the line is just spinning. Actual clutch line doesn't seem to be, well, it is now. Okay. It might take you a little bit of time. But if this line is rusted to this fitting, you don't want to mess it up. So what you might want to consider instead, since you've got the slave cylinder out here, is just spin the slave cylinder off of it all the way. You don't have to get fancy with it. Just spin this off. And then when you go to put it back on, you can do the same thing in the opposite direction. So you can just put the fitting in here and then spin the whole slave cylinder until you get it in. But this fitting also rotates, so you got that going for you too. But sometimes you can work these fittings back and forth like this, and they'll come loose. More penetrating oil probably would have helped. This contains brake fluid. You don't want to get brake fluid on your paint. It'll ruin your finish. So do what you can to avoid getting any brake fluid onto any paint anywhere. Any paint that you care about anyway. Slave cylinder is officially removed. Look at what you did. You're awesome. Now that I've got the slave cylinder out, I'm going to turn my attention to the clutch master, which lives down in there. It is sort of crammed up against the brake booster. You can pull this out. There we go. Okay. And that's just the reservoir connected to a soft line that goes down to it. You can just take that out now. Before we get too far into the master cylinder replacement, before you go in and remove the fasteners, there is this clip that you can see right there that goes through the clutch master. You can come in here with a screwdriver and you can pry that clip out. You can see the other sides of it there. But if you pry that clip out, that will release this line and everything in here. So do this first before you detach it from the firewall. Me, I'm doing something a little bit different with mine. I'm replacing this hard line with a different type of line. But to make it easier for you, the easiest thing for you to do is to remove that clip, which I'll do for you here. I just can't do it one-handed. And then you can pull this whole assembly right up out of here. You might see where it reached a point where the line just pulled right out. So this line has an O-ring on it, and it was just able to pull right out after a certain point. The clutch master is kind of the easy one, believe it or not. You'll see there's a couple of 12 millimeter fasteners that hold it. You follow the clutch pedal up, and there'll be sort of a little clip. And there'll also be a pin here. So you remove this clip, remove this pin, and that part is free. The next thing is there are two 12 millimeter fasteners on either side of it that need to come off. I'm going to remove all of that now. I'll start by removing that clip. Get that out. Push it through. You can pull it through the other side. So there's your pin. And now, those two 12 millimeter fasteners, there's one here and one on the other side. Right there, in my hand, is my clutch master, along with its reservoir. Now we have our clutch master over here on the bench, and I have it sitting on my oil drain pan. What you want to do is you want to remove that clip that you just got out of here, and you want to take it and you want to insert it into your new clutch master, but not all the way. You want to just put it in enough to get it started, and then you would reinstall it, and then you would push this back in. Also, anytime I'm at a salvage yard and I see these, I try to grab them. They can get bent, broken, all kinds of things. They're expensive if you have to get them from Honda, but if you have one handy, you got one handy. I'm not a fan of this particular type of clutch. This is a damper. This actually helps the clutch engage and disengage more smoothly. So if you're not an experienced manual transmission driver, this is probably helping you. But I don't like it, so I'm getting rid of it. And to get rid of it, I actually spent a stupid amount of money on some Go Fast clutch parts, but they don't have this damper in it. So I've got a new clutch master and slave, But what I'm also doing is I'm replacing the line with this flexible line here. To get that old line off, there was just one more bracket down below and one more 10mm fastener on the frame rail. Follow it down from the master cylinder, you will find it. There should be a new O-ring down on the bottom of your new master. I know there's no O-ring on this piece, so you might want to clean this up a little bit before you install it, like if it's all corroded and everything. That way you're sure to have the O-ring seal, because if it doesn't, well, that's no bueno. Remove the reservoir, because you'll need to do this too. Remove the reservoir, and you can see all that yucky liquid. You really should replace your clutch fluid about every, I'd say 30,000 miles-ish or so, and that'll help keep this clean. What happens is this hose and all the rubber parts inside the system start to degrade. Also, some of the hard lines get rust on the inside of them, so you'll get this rusty, yucky gook. Like, look at this, which, frankly, could be so much better. See how gross that is? All right, now I'm gonna take my time, clean this out with some brake cleaner so that it's all fresh and ready to go with its new parts. I also spray through the rubber line. Looks better already. Here are my new parts, which, as you can see, are KTuned parts. I spent way more money on this than I needed to, but I wanted to go all the way. So here's the new slave cylinder. Now, before you install the new slave cylinder, I recommend you take a little bit of anti-seize and you put it on this ball end before installing it. And this, sometimes that clutch lever can get a little rusty inside and it squeaks. This helps prevent that. I suppose you could use grease also, but I find that this tends to last the longest. Here's my new clutch master. It comes with a new gasket, which I hope yours does also, because I like having that replaced at the same time. So you've got your new, I don't know what, clevis, maybe calling this, that you put on here. And this whole thing should rotate inside the master cylinder so that you can turn this with this being still. But when you install it, make sure that you install it so that the pin side, or I like to install it like this, so that the side you install the clip on is the side that you can get at. So this is exactly how this is going to go inside the vehicle. You're looking at the firewall right now. You want to be able to put the pin through this way so that you can put your clip on this side. If it's the other way around, you'll be able to get the pin in really easy, but you're going to have a heck of a time with that clip. So when you put it in, put this to the left, this part here. You can do this now or you can do this later. I like to do it now because I can get to the this clip really easy. So I'll just be able to move this down here. There's no pressure in this side of the system. It just needs to just hold in place. So this guy's ready to install now. Now, since I don't have a fancy clip, I'm gonna have to attach my new line before I put the master down in there. My clutch master is all installed and ready to be fastened on the inside. Before I go and mess with anything on the inside, the first thing I'm going to do is install the slave cylinder. A couple of things on the slave before I do the installs. I'll remove the cap, also loosen the bleeder just out here because I've got it in my hand. I'll just loosen it and then I'll just tighten it. But sometimes what I'll do is as I'm working, I'll fill the system and just leave this open. And I'll work, and this will start to gravity bleed. And then I can tighten this off and check the system, and sometimes I don't need to bleed it at all. So the way this KTuned setup works is very similar to the original equipment, except they use different fittings. If you had to replace these, you could just replace them down to here, and you can go back to the original parts. We're back under the dash with it sort of lined up. Push the clutch pedal in, put the pin through. Once you got that there, next, install your pin. And despite the fact that I spent more on these, I suspect that this thing here is simply not lining up because this is too wide. You can expect this with any aftermarket part, not just this stupid expensive one. So here's the issue. So I'm trying to push this pin through, but I hope you can see that there's just not enough space there to get it all through the other side. That's the problem. Go to the original equipment one, but look at that. Look at all that space to put the pin in. Boom, done. The other thing that the aftermarket companies will do to you is they will take the 12 millimeter nut that was on the master cylinder, switch it over to a 13 millimeter. Throw that garbage away. I just take the old one and put it back on. None of this stuff really matters, quote unquote, but I often have to switch these over on the aftermarket parts. So if you're not using Honda parts, expect to do this. And look at that. With the original equipment stuff, everything just went right back together. Go figure. So the two 12 millimeters that you removed, reinstall those. Okay, we have made some real progress. Now, time to do the adjustment. And it shouldn't be tight, it shouldn't be loose. All you need to do is turn this center piece here, the center rod, until it just barely makes contact. This locks the adjustment in place, this nut right here. But first I have to come in here and move this a little bit. Okay, that's gonna be good for the initial adjustment. You want it to just touch the outside of that cup in there. And it's not overextending. And it fits in there a little bit loose. Like I hope you can see that it does fit in there. The clutch pedal fits in there a little loose. So that's where I want it. Now we'll bleed the system and then we'll come back and do the final adjustment. I thought I was going to be all cool and use my special tool that puts a little bit of pressure in the system and I could do it as a one-man job, but no. I am in the same boat as you, probably, and I don't have said special tool to use. The system uses brake fluid. Dot 3 works fine. I'm just going to go ahead and top off the master cylinder for the moment. Now the important thing is, during this whole procedure, is not to let it run dry. If it does run dry, then you kind of have to start all over. And you may have noticed I've left the battery and everything out so that I can get easy access to the bleeder on the back of the slave cylinder. All right, now the clutch pedal is just gonna want to go to the floor just because, well, there's no pressure in it and there's air. I'm just gonna pump the clutch pedal a bunch of times to try to move some of the air through the system and get it down towards the slave cylinder so that I can purge it. So I'm just gonna pump this a series of times, try to get some fluid into the system. When I come out here, crack the bleeder valve open. I'm really glad I took the battery out. Given that I'm having trouble getting a wrench on it, just gonna do it by my hand to loosen and tighten it, because you don't need to tighten it to get it to seal. Now, I'll push the pedal down, come out here, close the valve, pull the pedal up, open the valve, push the pedal down, come out here, close the valve, pull the pedal up, and I'm gonna hope very much that bleeds the system out, making sure the master stays topped off. Again, if we lose that, we have to start all over. And by the way, every time you pull up, the fluid should be going down a little bit. And I've got my catch pan and piece of cardboard underneath the car to catch any drips, which there will be. All right, I've done that a few times. Try to tighten that bleeder valve, or snug it. And then we'll work the pedal a few times and see if I got a clutch. Hey, I'm starting to get clutch. Now I'm gonna come back in, reinstall everything, battery and all of that. Then I'll start it up and I'll check the clutch and its operation and just make sure I got my adjustment right. And then I'll tighten that lock nut. When you fill the master up for the final time, you don't need to fill it up all the way to the top. In fact, just hit the bottom of the threads there where I've got it, and you probably should be good. Everything's all back together. Now I'm gonna try the clutch, see how it feels, make a final adjustment, call this done. Hopefully it's good, because if not, well, take it out of gear. Oh, that's good. It's really good. I like where that's at. I'm gonna lock down that 12 millimeter and call this done. And I can't forget, there's no more clicking. One thing that I was trying to solve through all of this. So did fix it with the clutch master. So we've got a clicking clutch pedal, take a look at the Clutch Master. It could be your culprit. I've gone back and forth a lot about how I feel about this clutch pedal and how much I spent on these parts. I've made a whole other video about it, so it will be linked somewhere. Go find that link, and then you can get more information on that. Back to you, Eric. There you have it, viewers. A Clutch Master and a Clutch Slave replacement on a 2005 Honda Element. Come to think of it, this will probably work for all Elements, as well as CRVs of a similar vintage. So if you've got one with a manual transmission, it's got clutch hydraulics issues, I hope this video helps. Down in the description, I will link the parts that I used, and you don't have to use the parts that I use. In fact, I'll give you a few options as far as parts go. Also, some tools may be linked down there. Check the description for additional information. Also, if you have automotive questions that weren't covered in this video, linked in the description will be Ericthecarguy.com, which there's a whole bunch of stuff there to help you with, well, just about whatever. Thank you so much for watching today. Be safe, have fun, stay dirty. I'll see you next time.